The thundering sound of the train whistle echoed through the station as Penelope Wilson clutched her worn leather suitcase, her knuckles turning white. The year was 1875, and Ukiah, California was the final stop on her harrowing journey from Boston, a journey she both dreaded and desperately needed. "Last stop, Ukiah. All passengers disembark," the conductor called. Penelope took a shaky breath, adjusting her modest blue traveling dress that hung loosely on her thin frame. At 22, she looked older, her once bright eyes dimmed by years of hardship. She touched the letter in her pocket, the response from Forrest Blackwell, the man who would become her husband by sundown tomorrow if all went according to plan. A man she had never met. A man who, like all men in her experience, could not be trusted. The platform was bustling with activity as Penelope stepped off the train, her legs unsteady after days of travel. Dust swirled around her ankles, and the California sun beat down mercilessly. She scanned the crowd, looking for a man matching the description in Forrest's letters, tall, broad-shouldered, with a dark beard and kind eyes. The thought of kind eyes almost made her laugh. She'd learned the hard way that kindness in a man's gaze was often just a well-crafted mask. "Miss Wilson." Penelope flinched at the deep voice behind her, nearly dropping her suitcase as she spun around. There he stood, Forrest Blackwell, exactly as he had described himself. Tall and imposing in a clean white shirt and dark vest, his hat in his hands, a gesture of respect she hadn't expected. "Mr. Blackwell," she managed, her voice barely audible over the station noise. "Yes, madam," he replied, maintaining a respectful distance that surprised her. "I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." His eyes were indeed kind, but Penelope had learned not to trust appearances. Her stepfather's eyes had seemed kind too until they weren't. So had the eyes of her former employer. "It was long," she answered, taking a small step back when he reached for her suitcase. Forrest immediately withdrew his hand, noticing her reaction. "I've got a wagon waiting." "It's a short ride to my ranch. I can take your case if you'd like, or you can carry it yourself, whatever makes you comfortable." The careful choice of words wasn't lost on Penelope. This man was giving her options, something she'd rarely been granted by men before. "I can manage," she said firmly, gripping the handle tighter. "Of course." He nodded, gesturing toward the end of the platform where a sturdy wagon waited, pulled by two chestnut horses. "This way when you're ready." The walk to the wagon was silent, tension hanging between them like a tangible thing. Penelope studied him from the corner of her eye, watching for any sign of the temper or impatience she'd come to expect from men. But Forrest simply walked beside her, maintaining that same respectful distance, his strides shortened to match her pace. At the wagon, he finally spoke again. "May I help you up? The step is high." Penelope hesitated, then gave a quick nod, allowing him to take her suitcase and place it in the wagon bed. When he offered his hand to assist her, she ignored it, struggling to climb up on her own. She didn't miss the flash of understanding in his eyes. "I should tell you something, Mr. Blackwell," she said as he climbed up beside her, keeping to the far edge of the seat. "I came here because I had no choice, not because I wish to be a wife in the traditional sense." Forrest picked up the reins but paused before setting the horses in motion. "Miss Wilson, I want to be clear about something. The arrangement I proposed in my letter stands. You'll have your own room in my house. I need help with the keeping of my home and ranch, and companionship would be welcome, but I make no demands beyond what you're willing to give." He met her eyes directly, his gaze steady. "The preacher's expecting us tomorrow afternoon, but if you want to delay or call this off entirely after seeing the place, I'll respect that. I'll still pay your way back east if that's what you decide." Penelope stared at him, searching for the lie, the trick, the trap. There was always a trap with men like this. Handsome men who owned land didn't seek mail-order brides without expecting certain benefits, yet his expression remained open, undemanding. "Why would you offer that?" she asked suspiciously. Forrest clicked his tongue to set the horses moving before answering. because a marriage should be entered willingly by both parties or not at all. As they left the bustling streets of Ukiah behind, Penelope turned her face toward the sprawling landscape of Northern California. Golden hills rolled into the distance, dotted with oak trees and patches of forest. It was beautiful and remote. Escape would be difficult if things went badly. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside town," Forrest explained, breaking the silence. "It's not the biggest spread in the county, but it's good land. 200 acres, mostly for cattle, though I keep a kitchen garden and some fruit trees near the house." Penelope nodded stiffly, keeping her gaze on the passing scenery. "And you manage it alone?" "I have 2 ranch hands who help with the cattle. Brothers Miguel and Javier Ramirez. They have a cabin on the property." He paused. "They won't bother you, they're good men, good men." Penelope had heard that phrase too often to believe it. "And in the house?" she asked. "Just me," Forrest replied. "That's why I wrote to the agency. The place needs a woman's touch and I'm not much for cooking or keeping things proper like." He glanced at her briefly. "My mother passed 2 years ago. She kept house for me after my father died." Despite herself, Penelope felt a twinge of sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," he said quietly. "She was a fine woman, strong, reminds me a bit of you actually." Penelope bristled. "You don't know anything about me, Mr. Blackwell?" "No, madam, I don't," he agreed easily. "Just an impression from your letters. You write with conviction." The wagon rattled over a wooden bridge spanning a creek, and Penelope grabbed the seat to steady herself. Her fingers accidentally brushed against Forrest's thigh, and she yanked her hand back as if burned. If he noticed her reaction, he gave no sign, simply pointing ahead. "That's Blackwell Ranch just over that rise. Been in my family for 3 generations now." As they crested the hill, Penelope caught her first glimpse of what might become her home. A 2-story white farmhouse stood proudly against the backdrop of distant mountains, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A barn and several outbuildings formed a neat cluster nearby, while cattle grazed in the pastures beyond. It was larger and more prosperous looking than she had imagined. "It's impressive," she admitted reluctantly. Forrest's expression warmed slightly. "It's home. Not fancy like what you might be used to back east, but solid." "I wasn't used to fancy, Mr. Blackwell," she corrected him. "I worked as a seamstress." And before that, she'd endured her stepfather's house, but she wouldn't speak of that. As they approached the house, Penelope noticed the carefully tended flower beds alongside the porch and the rocking chairs facing the sunset. Someone had painted the shutters recently, small touches that suggested care. Forrest brought the wagon to a halt in front of the house. "I'll show you to your room first. Give you a chance to rest before dinner. You must be tired from your journey." He jumped down and came around to her side, standing back to give her space to descend on her own if she wished. Penelope hesitated, then accepted his outstretched hand, touching it as briefly as possible as she stepped down. The inside of the house was unexpectedly well kept, with polished wooden floors and simple but tasteful furniture. A stone fireplace dominated the sitting room and large windows let in ample light. "Kitchen's through there," Forrest said, gesturing to the right. "Dining room next to it. My study's down this hall, bedrooms are upstairs." He led her up a wide staircase to the 2nd floor where a hallway ran the length of the house. "This one's yours," he said, opening the door to a spacious bedroom at the front of the house, overlooking the property. Penelope stepped inside, surprised by the room's charm. A large bed with a handmade quilt stood against one wall, while a dresser with a mirror occupied another. Fresh wildflowers sat in a vase on the bedside table, and the curtains looked newly laundered. "Did you prepare this?" she asked, puzzled by the feminine touches. Forrest shifted his weight, looking almost embarrassed. "Mrs. Parker from town helped. I mentioned I had a bride coming. She thought you might appreciate a woman's eye for detail." Penelope moved to the window, looking out at the vast expanse of the ranch. From here, she could see for miles the cattle in the distance, the creek winding through the property, the mountains beyond. It was beautiful but also isolated. She would be alone here with this man, dependent on his goodwill. The bathroom is at the end of the hall, Forrest continued, still standing in the doorway, not entering her space. It's not fancy, but there's running water. My father put it in before he passed. I'll bring up hot water if you want to bathe. Thank you, she said formally. I would appreciate that, Forrest nodded. I'll fetch your suitcase and leave you to get settled. Dinner's at 6, but if you're too tired, I can bring a tray up. The consideration surprised her again. She'd expected demands, not options. I'll come down, she decided, wanting to maintain some control by not being confined to the room. After he left, Penelope explored the room more thoroughly, running her fingers over the furniture, checking the lock on the door it worked, to her relief, and examining the window, calculating whether she could escape through it if necessary. When Forrest returned with her suitcase and buckets of hot water for the bath, he kept his eyes averted, setting everything down quickly before retreating. Take all the time you need, he said before closing the door. Alone at last, Penelope sank onto the edge of the bed, trembling slightly as the tension she'd been holding finally released. She hadn't expected kindness or consideration. In her experience, men wanted one thing from women like her, women desperate enough to become mail-order brides. The bath helped ease the physical fatigue of her journey, but did little to calm her racing thoughts. As she dressed for dinner in one of her 2 decent dresses, she reminded herself to stay vigilant. One day of respectful behavior didn't mean she was safe. When she descended the stairs at 6 o'clock, Penelope found Forrest in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up as he stirred something on the stove. The domestic scene was so unexpected that she paused at the doorway. "Hope you like beef stew," he said without turning, somehow sensing her presence. "It's about all I can make that's fit to eat. You cook." She couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "Badly," Forrest admitted with a self-deprecating smile, finally glancing her way. "But I manage. Would have cleaned up better if I knew you were coming down to dinner." "I can help," Penelope offered automatically, then wondered why she'd said it. She was supposed to be keeping her distance, not offering assistance. Forrest shook his head. "Not tonight. You're still a guest until you decide otherwise. There's fresh bread on the table, Mrs. Parker brought it over this morning." The dining room table was already set for 2, with mismatched but clean dishes and a bunch of wildflowers similar to those in her room. Penelope sat stiffly in the chair Forrest pulled out for her, watching as he served the stew. "I should tell you more about what I expect," he said as he sat across from her. "If you decide to stay, that is." Penelope tensed, her spoon hovering over her bowl. Here it comes, she thought. The house needs looking after, cooking, cleaning, mending. "I'd appreciate help with the accounts. My mother used to do them. I'm not much for figures." He broke off a piece of bread. "In return, you'd have a 3rd share in the ranch, your own allowance to spend as you see fit, and my name for protection if you want it." "And what do you expect from me as a wife?" Penelope asked bluntly, needing to hear it stated plainly. Forrest met her gaze steadily. "Companionship would be welcome, someone to talk with at the end of the day. As for the rest..." He seemed to choose his words carefully. "I won't deny I'd hope for a true marriage eventually, but I won't demand it. Not ever. And if I never want that kind of relationship," she pressed, "then we'd have a partnership instead of a marriage in the traditional sense. It wouldn't be the first such arrangement out here." He took a sip of water. "I'm 31 years old, Miss Wilson. I've lived alone since my mother passed. I'm not looking for a plaything or a servant. I'm looking for a partner." Penelope studied him, trying to detect any hint of deception. "Most men would want an heir." "Most men would," he agreed, "but I'd rather have a willing partner than an heir born to a reluctant mother." They ate in silence for several minutes, Penelope's mind whirling with conflicting thoughts. The stew was actually quite good, hearty and flavorful, and she found herself finishing the bowl despite her anxiety. "Tell me about yourself," Forrest said as he refilled her water glass, careful not to touch her hand. "Your letters were polite but didn't say much beyond the basics." "There isn't much to tell," she replied guardedly. I was born in Boston. My mother died when I was 16. I worked as a seamstress until the shop closed. And your father died when I was young. My mother remarried. Her tone made it clear this topic was closed. Forrest seemed to understand, shifting the conversation. Have you always lived in the city? Yes. Penelope glanced around the dining room. This is very different. It's quiet, Forrest acknowledged. Some find it too quiet. Town's not far, though. I go in twice a week for supplies and mail. You'd be welcome to join me. If I stay, she reminded him. If you stay, he agreed. No pressure on that account. Take a few days to see the place, see if you think you could make a life here. After dinner, Forrest showed her to the sitting room, offering her a book from the surprisingly well-stocked bookshelf before excusing himself to check on the livestock before dark. Left alone, Penelope explored the downstairs more thoroughly, noting the cleanliness of the kitchen, the quality of the furnishings simple but well-made, and the photographs on the mantel. One showed a younger Forrest with an older couple she assumed were his parents. Another captured him standing proudly beside a prized bull at what appeared to be a county fair. The third, more recent, showed him with the Ramirez brothers, all three laughing as they sat on a corral fence. He looked happy in the photographs. Normal. Not like a man with dark secrets or violent tendencies, but Penelope knew appearances could be deceiving. Her stepfather had been respected in the community, his abuse hidden behind closed doors. When Forrest returned, he kept to his side of the sitting room, engaging her in casual conversation about books, discovering they shared a fondness for Dickens and the surrounding area. He didn't press when she gave short answers, and he excused himself early, saying he rose before dawn. "Sleep well, Miss Wilson," he said from the doorway. "Breakfast is usually at 5, but I'll leave something out for you to have whenever you wake. No need to keep rancher's hours on your first day." As Penelope prepared for bed, she tested the lock on her door again, pushing a chair under the handle for good measure. The bed was more comfortable than any she'd slept in for years, but sleep eluded her as she listened to every creak and groan of the unfamiliar house, half expecting footsteps approaching her door. None came, and eventually, exhaustion claimed her. The morning sun was well above the horizon when Penelope awakened, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day came flooding back, and she quickly dressed, embarrassed to have slept so late. Downstairs, she found a note on the kitchen table. "Miss Wilson, there's coffee in the pot, biscuits in the cloth, and preserves in the pantry. I'm out checking the north pasture. Back by noon. Make yourself at home. FB." The coffee was still warm, and the biscuits, though simple, were surprisingly good. After eating, Penelope spent the morning exploring the house more thoroughly, taking inventory of what would be her domain if she chose to stay. The kitchen was well equipped but disorganized, the pantry stocked with staples. The linen closet needed attention, and there was dust in the corners of the less used rooms. But overall, the house was in better condition than she'd expected for a bachelor's residence. Around noon, she heard the sound of horses approaching. From the kitchen window, she watched as Forrest dismounted, speaking briefly with two men she assumed were the Ramirez brothers before they rode off toward a cabin visible in the distance. Forrest led his horse to the barn, disappearing inside. Penelope busied herself making a simple lunch from the supplies she'd found, needing something to occupy her hands. When Forrest entered the kitchen some minutes later, he looked surprised to find her cooking. "You didn't have to do that," he said, washing his hands at the sink. "I wanted to see what I'd be working with," she replied, setting a plate of ham and biscuits on the table. "If I stay," she added quickly. "If you stay," he echoed, taking a seat. "Thank you." They ate together, the silence less strained than the previous evening. Afterward, Forrest offered to show her the rest of the property. "I'd like to see it," Penelope agreed, curious about the ranch despite her reservations. Forrest led her first to the barn, a large, well-built structure that housed 6 horses, a milk cow, and storage for hay and equipment. Next came the chicken coop where a dozen hens scratched in the dirt of a fenced yard. A vegetable garden, somewhat overgrown but still productive, stretched behind the house. Mother kept this much better, Forrest admitted, surveying the garden. I try, but between the cattle and everything else. It has potential, Penelope observed, already mentally planning how she would reorganize it. They walked to the creek that ran through the property where a small dock extended into a deep pool. Good fishing here, Forrest said, and swimming in the summer heat. As they continued their tour, Penelope noticed how Forrest maintained a respectful distance, never crowding her, always ensuring she had a clear path if she wanted to move away. It was subtle but unmistakable he was being careful not to frighten her. By the time they returned to the house, the sun was lowering toward the western hills, casting long shadows across the yard. Forrest paused on the porch, removing his hat. I need to finish some chores before dark, he said. But I wanted to let you know that the preacher will be expecting us tomorrow at 2, if you've decided. Penelope felt a flutter of anxiety. So soon? No rush, Forrest assured her quickly. Like I said, you can take more time or decide against it entirely. Just thought you should know the arrangement. Penelope nodded, watching as he replaced his hat and headed toward the barn. She remained on the porch, settling into one of the rocking chairs to watch the sunset. The land was beautiful in the golden evening light, peaceful in a way Boston had never been. Could she make a life here? The question turned in her mind as the shadows lengthened. Forrest seemed decent enough, but she'd been fooled before. Still, the alternative, returning to Boston with no prospects and dwindling funds, was bleak. When Forrest returned for dinner, Penelope had made her decision, at least a preliminary one. I'll go to town with you tomorrow, she said as they sat down to the meal she'd prepared. But I'd like to meet the preacher before making any final decisions. Relief flickered across Forrest's face. That's fair. He's a good man, Reverend Thomason, known him most of my life. And if I still have doubts after meeting him, then we come back here and you take more time, Forrest said simply. No pressure. That night, Penelope again locked her door and wedged the chair beneath the handle, but her anxiety had lessened somewhat. Forrest Blackwell was either the most patient, respectful man she'd ever encountered, or he was playing a very long game. Either way, she'd be vigilant. The journey to Ukiah the next day was made in a better wagon than the one that had met her at the station, with a padded seat and a canopy for shade. Penelope wore her best dress, a blue calico with a lace collar, and carried a small satchel with her most important possessions, just in case she needed to flee. Ukiah was a typical western town, one main street lined with businesses, side streets with modest homes, a church steeple visible above the other buildings. People nodded respectfully to Forrest as they passed, curious eyes taking in Penelope beside him. Their first stop was the general store, where Forrest introduced her to the proprietor, Mr. Parker, and his wife, the same Mrs. Parker who had helped prepare the house for her arrival. So pleased to meet you, dear, Mrs. Parker gushed, a plump, friendly woman with kind eyes. Forrest has been waiting for you for months, wouldn't even look at any of the local girls, said he'd made a commitment. Penelope glanced at Forrest, who looked slightly embarrassed. Mrs. Parker tends to exaggerate, he said with a small smile. I do not, the older woman protested. You've been as faithful to this arrangement as if you were already married. Not many men would be so honorable. After collecting the supplies, Forrest needed and making a few additional purchases, including fabric for new curtains that Mrs. Parker insisted was a wedding gift. They headed to the church at the end of the street. Reverend Thomason was waiting in his study, a tall, thin man with spectacles and a thoughtful expression. He greeted them warmly, but became serious when Forrest explained Penelope's desire to speak with him before finalizing their arrangement. Perhaps Miss Wilson would like to speak with me privately, the Reverend suggested. Forrest nodded immediately. I'll wait outside. Once alone with the preacher, Penelope found herself unexpectedly at a loss for words. How could she explain her fears without revealing too much of her past? "Mr. Blackwell seems like an unusual man," she finally said. "Is he truly as patient as he appears?" Reverend Thomason smiled kindly. "I've known Forrest since he was a boy. He's his mother's son, steady, principled, and uncommonly considerate. His father was a good man too, but quicker to anger. Forrest learned young that patience accomplishes more than force. And you've never known him to be cruel, to women especially." Penelope pressed. The Reverend's expression grew serious. "Miss Wilson, I sense you've had experiences that make you cautious, and rightfully so. There are many cruel men in this world." He leaned forward slightly. "But I can say with certainty that Forrest Blackwell is not one of them. In all my years of knowing him, I've never seen him raise a hand in anger, nor heard him speak cruelly to any woman." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "His mother, God rest her soul, was very particular about how he was raised. She'd suffered at the hands of her own father and was determined her son would be different." Penelope felt a small surge of hope at this revelation. "He mentioned wanting a partnership, not just a traditional marriage." "That sounds like Forrest," the Reverend agreed. "He's a practical man. Values substance over appearance." He studied her face. "May I speak frankly, Miss Wilson?" At her nod, he continued, "I've performed many marriages for mail-order brides in these parts. Some work, some don't. But I believe you could do far worse than Forrest Blackwell, and I'm not certain you could do better, not because you're lacking in any way," he added quickly, "but because men of his character are rare anywhere, and especially on the frontier." Their conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Reverend Thomason answering her questions honestly and sharing stories of Forrest's character, how he'd once spent 3 days searching for a lost child, how he'd extended credit to struggling farmers during bad years, how he'd nursed his mother through her final illness with devotion. By the time Forrest was invited back in, Penelope had made her decision. "I'd like to proceed with the ceremony," she told him quietly, "but I want to be clear about my terms." Forrest's expression brightened, then grew serious as he nodded. "Of course. I'll fulfill all the duties of managing your home and helping with the accounts. I'll be a proper wife in public, but in private." She took a deep breath. "I need time, perhaps a long time. I can't promise when or if I'll ever be ready for a true marriage." "I understand," Forrest said solemnly. "All I ask is that you're honest with me. If you're ever uncomfortable or unhappy, tell me so I can fix it if possible." The ceremony itself was simple and brief. Penelope wore the blue dress, Forrest a clean suit that fit him well. Mrs. Parker and her husband served as witnesses, along with the Ramirez brothers, who arrived just in time, having ridden into town when Forrest failed to return at the expected hour. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Forrest didn't attempt to kiss her, simply taking her hand briefly and giving it a gentle squeeze before releasing it. The gesture, small as it was, brought unexpected tears to Penelope's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. The return to the ranch, now officially her home, was quiet, both of them absorbed in their thoughts. As they approached the house in the golden late afternoon light, Penelope felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. She had taken an enormous risk, binding herself legally to a man she barely knew. Yet something in her responded to the steadiness she sensed in Forrest Blackwell. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwell," he said as he helped her down from the wagon. The name sounded foreign to her ears. "Thank you." "Forrest," she replied, using his given name for the first time. A small smile touched his lips at the sound of it, but he simply nodded and led the way inside. The first weeks of their unusual marriage established a pattern. Penelope rose early to prepare breakfast, then spent her days organizing the house to her liking, tending the garden, and learning the rhythm of ranch life. Forrest worked from dawn to dusk, taking his meals quickly before returning to his endless tasks, always respectful, always keeping his distance. They spoke at dinner each evening, gradually growing more comfortable with each other. Penelope learned about cattle ranching and the challenges of the land, While Forrest showed interest in her previous work as a seamstress and her life in Boston, though he never pressed, when she fell silent about certain periods of her past. At night, they retired to separate bedrooms, Forrest always bidding her a polite good night before disappearing down the hall. Penelope continued to lock her door, though the chair beneath the handle eventually seemed unnecessary. The first real test of their arrangement came 3 weeks after the wedding, when a violent thunderstorm struck just after midnight. Penelope woke to crashing thunder and the sound of something hitting the roof. Terrified, she huddled in her bed, memories of another storm and the violence that had followed it flooding back. A knock at her door sent her heart racing. "Penelope," Forrest's voice called over the howling wind. "Are you all right? The oak branch came down on the roof." She didn't answer, paralyzed by fear not of the storm, but of what might happen if she opened the door to him in the middle of the night. "Penelope," his voice was more worried now, "I'm not coming in, I promise. Just let me know you're not hurt." I'm fine," she finally managed, her voice shaking. "Thank God," he said, relief evident in his tone. "Stay away from the window on the west side. I need to check the rest of the house for damage. I'll be downstairs if you need anything." His footsteps moved away, and Penelope realized she was crying not from fear, but from the simple fact that he hadn't tried to enter her room, even during a potential emergency. The storm raged for hours, but true to his word, Forrest remained downstairs. When morning came, Penelope found him asleep in a chair in the sitting room, his clothes damp from checking the roof in the rain. "You should have woken me," she said, startling him awake. "I could have helped." Forrest rubbed his face, looking exhausted. "You were scared. Seemed best to let you be." It was a simple statement, but it struck Penelope deeply. He had recognized her fear and respected it, even at cost to himself. "How bad is the damage?" she asked, handing him a cup of coffee she'd prepared. Branch punched a small hole in the roof over the spare room. "I got a tarp over it, but I'll need to fix it properly today." He accepted the coffee gratefully. "Thank you." "I'll help," she offered, surprising herself. "I can hand you tools or hold things steady." Forrest looked up at her, something warming in his eyes. "I'd appreciate that." Working together on the roof repair that day marked a subtle shift in their relationship. Penelope found herself less tense in Forrest's presence, more willing to engage in conversation. He remained respectful as always, but occasionally she caught him watching her with a quiet longing that made her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with something else she wasn't ready to name. As spring turned to summer, the ranch flourished under their joint care. Penelope's garden produced an abundance of vegetables, and she took pride in preserving them for the coming winter. The house was transformed by her touch curtains at all the windows, flowers on the tables, everything clean and organized. Forrest brought her into the business side of the ranch gradually, teaching her about the accounts and record keeping. She proved to have a good head for figures, identifying several areas where they could save money or increase profits. Her suggestions were always met with genuine consideration and often implemented. "You have a natural talent for this," Forrest told her one evening as they reviewed the monthly accounts together at the dining table. "The ranch is doing better than it has in years." "I enjoy it," Penelope admitted. "It's satisfying to see the results of our work." "Our work," he repeated with a small smile. "I like the sound of that." Their shared accomplishments fostered a growing companionship. They began spending evenings together in the sitting room, reading or talking. Sometimes Forrest would play the harmonica while Penelope sewed. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, enjoying the peace after a day's work, yet physical barriers remained firmly in place. Forrest never touched her beyond the occasional accidental brush of hands, and Penelope maintained her distance, though she found herself increasingly aware of him as a man, his strength as he worked around the ranch, the kindness in his eyes when he spoke to her, the rare but wonderful sound of his laughter. In July, Penelope accompanied Forrest to the county fair, where he was entering his prized bull in competition. It was their first major social outing as a married couple, and she felt unexpectedly nervous as they drove into town. "Everyone will be watching us," she said, adjusting her new dress, a green calico she'd made herself, "wondering about us." Forrest glanced at her, understanding in his eyes. "We don't have to go if it makes you uncomfortable." "No, I want to," she insisted. What do I say when people ask about us? About our marriage?" "Whatever you're comfortable with," he replied simply. "We're partners running a ranch together. That's truth enough for anyone who asks." The fair was bustling with activity, livestock competitions, craft displays, food vendors, and games. Penelope felt overwhelmed at first by the crowds and noise, staying close to Forrest's side without realizing she was doing so. When Mrs. Parker spotted them and hurried over with several other women in tow, Penelope tensed, anticipating intrusive questions. "Mrs. Blackwell, we've been hoping you'd come," the older woman exclaimed. "Ladies, this is Penelope Blackwell, Forrest's bride from back east." "Penelope, these are some of the ranch wives from the area." To Penelope's surprise, the women welcomed her warmly without prying, instead inviting her to join them while Forrest saw to his bull. "Go ahead," Forrest encouraged when she hesitated. "I'll be tied up with the judging for a while anyway." The afternoon with the women proved unexpectedly enjoyable. They shared stories of their early days on the frontier, offered practical advice about ranch life, and treated her as one of their own. When the conversation inevitably turned to husbands, Penelope found herself saying, "Forrest is the most patient man I've ever known." "That's no surprise," said Mrs. Miller, a rancher's wife from the next valley. "His mother made sure of that. Wouldn't tolerate any disrespect toward women in that house." "You knew his mother well?" Penelope asked, curious. "Clara Blackwell was my dearest friend," Mrs. Miller replied. "A remarkable woman. She raised that boy right after Henry died." She glanced toward the livestock pens where Forrest was visible, talking with the judges. She'd be pleased with his choice in a wife. She always said he needed a strong woman with a mind of her own. Later, when Forrest's bull won first prize, Penelope found herself genuinely sharing in his pride and happiness. As they drove home in the twilight, the blue ribbon pinned to the wagon seat between them, she felt a growing certainty that she had made the right decision in staying. "Thank you for today," she said as the ranch came into view. "I enjoyed myself more than I expected." Forrest smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "I'm glad. It was good to see you talking with the other women. You seemed more at ease." "I was," she admitted. "They were kind. Most folks around here are," he replied, "once they get to know you." That night, for the first time, Penelope didn't lock her bedroom door. The realization came to her as she was preparing for bed, the familiar motion of reaching for the key suddenly seeming unnecessary. She paused, her hand hovering over the lock, then deliberately turned away. It wasn't an invitation, she wasn't ready for that, but it was an acknowledgement of the trust that had grown between them. August brought sweltering heat that tested everyone's patience. The cattle grew restless, the garden required constant watering, and the house became stifling despite open windows and doors. Forrest worked longer hours, often returning so exhausted he fell asleep at the dinner table. One particularly brutal afternoon, Penelope was in the kitchen, canning peaches from their orchard, the added heat from the stove making the room nearly unbearable. Sweat trickled down her face and neck as she worked, her dress clinging uncomfortably to her skin. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn. Forrest stood in the doorway, his shirt soaked with sweat, his face reddened from the sun. "This can't be good for you," he said, frowning at the steaming pots. "It must be over 100 degrees in here." "The peaches won't wait," Penelope replied, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. "And we'll appreciate them come winter." Forrest shook his head. "At least take a break. Come down to the creek. The water's cool there." The idea was tempting, but Penelope hesitated. "I shouldn't leave these half done." "They'll keep for an hour," he insisted. "You look ready to faint." Too exhausted to argue, Penelope agreed, following him out of the house and down the path to the creek. The shade of the trees along the bank provided immediate relief, and the sound of running water was soothing after hours of canning. "I used to swim here every day in summer as a boy," Forrest said, leading her to a deep pool where the creek widened. "It's private here, can't be seen from the house or the road," he gestured to the water. "You should cool off. I'll go back up to the ridge to check on that fence and come back in half an hour." The offer of privacy was considerate, and Penelope found herself nodding gratefully. "Thank you." Once alone, she removed her shoes and stockings, then after a moment's hesitation, her dress as well, leaving only her chemise and drawers. The water was blissfully cool as she waded in, sighing with relief as it closed around her heated skin. She floated on her back, watching the leaves overhead, feeling truly relaxed for the first time in days. The worries and tensions that had been her constant companions for so long seemed to dissolve in the cool water. When she finally emerged, refreshed and calm, she found a clean towel waiting on a nearby rock. Forrest must have left it before departing. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. As promised, Forrest returned half an hour later, calling out from a distance to announce his presence. By then, Penelope was fully dressed again, her hair still damp but tidier. "Better?" he asked as they walked back to the house together. "Much," she admitted. "Thank you for insisting." "The peaches will still be there," he said with a small smile, "but heatstroke is nothing to risk." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset and hoping for a cooling breeze, Penelope found herself studying Forrest's profile, the strong jaw covered with his neatly trimmed beard, the straight nose, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. "Why did you become a mail-order bride?" he asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. It was the most personal question he'd ever asked her. Penelope stiffened slightly but found she wanted to answer at least partially. "I had few options left in Boston. The shop where I worked closed. I had no family to turn to. No family at all." His voice was gentle, encouraging but not demanding. "My mother died 6 years ago, my stepfather." She swallowed hard. "We were not on good terms." Forrest nodded, seeming to understand there was more to the story than she was saying. "And no young man caught your eye in Boston?" "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Men in my experience were not kind." "I'm sorry to hear that," Forrest said quietly. After a moment he added, "Not all men are the same, Penelope." "I know that now," she whispered, surprising herself with the admission. Their eyes met in the fading light, something unspoken passing between them. Forrest's hand moved slightly on the arm of his chair, as if he wanted to reach for her but stopped himself. "Why did you seek a mail-order bride?" Penelope asked, turning the question back to him. "You're well respected here. Surely there were local women who would have had you." Forrest smiled ruefully. "A few showed interest. But after Mother died, the house was so quiet, empty. I tried courting once or twice, but it never felt right." He looked out across the land, his expression thoughtful. "I wanted someone who would choose this life, not someone who'd grown up with it and couldn't imagine anything else. Someone with different experiences, different ideas. And you got me," Penelope said softly. "Yes," Forrest agreed, his voice warm. "I got you." September brought the cattle roundup, a busy time when Forrest was rarely home before dark. Penelope threw herself into preparing hearty meals for him and the Ramirez brothers, who often stayed for dinner during this period. She found herself watching the road each evening, a warm feeling spreading through her chest when she spotted Forrest riding toward the house. One evening, he didn't return at the usual time. As darkness fell with no sign of him, Penelope grew increasingly anxious, pacing from window to window. The Ramirez brothers had gone to their cabin hours ago, assuming Forrest was right behind them. When the clock struck 10 with still no sign of him, Penelope could bear it no longer. She grabbed a lantern and was preparing to go out in search of him when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Rushing to the door, she saw Forrest dismounting slowly, favoring his left side. Even in the dim light, she could see something was wrong. What happened? She asked, hurrying down the steps. Young Bull took exception to being herded, Forrest replied, his voice tight with pain. Caught me against the fence. Nothing broken, I don't think, but I'll be feeling it tomorrow. Without thinking, Penelope moved to his side, slipping her arm around his waist to support him. It was the first time she had initiated such contact, and she felt him stiffen in surprise before cautiously resting his arm across her shoulders. Lean on me, she instructed, helping him up the porch steps and into the house. In the kitchen, she eased him into a chair and lit more lamps to better assess his injuries. His shirt was torn and bloodied on the left side, and a dark bruise was forming on his jaw. Let me see, she said, her earlier fear transforming into purposeful energy. When he hesitated, she added more firmly, Your shirt needs to come off so I can tend those cuts. With a nod, Forrest began unbuttoning his shirt, wincing as he tried to shrug it off his shoulders. Without comment, Penelope helped him, her fingers working quickly and efficiently despite the intimate nature of the task. The sight of his bare chest muscular from years of ranch work, now marred by an angry scrape along his ribs, stirred something in her that she wasn't ready to examine. Instead, she focused on cleaning the wound with warm water and the whiskey Forrest kept for medicinal purposes. This will sting, she warned. Applying the alcohol-soaked cloth to the abrasion, Forrest inhaled sharply but made no complaint as she worked, her touch as gentle as she could make it. When the wound was clean, she applied a salve Mrs. Parker had given her and wrapped his ribs with strips of clean linen. Thank you, Forrest said as she finished, his voice low and rough. You have a healer's touch. Penelope felt warmth rise to her cheeks at the compliment. My mother was often ill. I learned to nurse her. She taught you well. He caught her hand as she was pulling away, holding it lightly enough that she could easily withdraw if she wished. I'm sorry I worried you, I thought. She swallowed hard, surprised by the depth of emotion that surged through her. I thought something terrible had happened. It would take more than an ornery bull to keep me from coming home to you, Forrest said softly, his eyes holding hers. In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of feelings that had been growing for months, carefully unacknowledged until now. Penelope felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest, a longing that both frightened and excited her. Slowly, hesitantly, she raised her free hand to touch Forrest's face, her fingers light against his bearded cheek. You should rest, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Can you make it upstairs? With help, he admitted. Supporting him up the stairs was an intimate challenge, their bodies pressed together by necessity. At the door to his bedroom, a room Penelope had cleaned but never really entered, she paused. I can manage from here, Forrest said, seemingly reading her uncertainty, but Penelope shook her head. Let me help you to bed, please. His room was simpler than hers, with a large bed, a dresser, and a small desk by the window. Books were stacked on the bedside table, and a photograph of his parents sat on the dresser. Penelope helped Forrest sit on the edge of the bed, then knelt to remove his boots. The domestic intimacy of the act wasn't lost on either of them. I'll be fine now, he assured her as she straightened. Thank you for your care. Penelope nodded, backing toward the door, suddenly shy. Call if you need anything in the night. I'll hear you. That night, she lay awake in her own bed, thinking about the man down the hall, his strength, his patience, his kindness. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long seemed to be giving way to something else, something warmer and more hopeful. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Penelope allowed herself to imagine a future where she might truly be Forrest's wife in every sense of the word. The next morning, she rose early to check on him, finding him already dressed and moving carefully around the kitchen despite his injuries. You should be resting, she scolded gently. Cattle won't feed themselves, he replied with a grimace as he reached for the coffee pot. Penelope moved quickly to take it from him. Sit. I'll make breakfast and then the Ramirez brothers can handle the cattle today. You need to heal. To her surprise, Forrest complied without argument, sinking into a chair at the table. You're a formidable woman when you take that tone, Mrs. Blackwell. The use of her married name, spoken with such obvious affection, brought a smile to her face. Someone has to be sensible around here, Mr. Blackwell. As fall deepened, bringing cooler weather and changing leaves, Penelope felt herself changing too. The wall of fear she'd built around her heart was crumbling, brick by brick, with each day she spent in Forrest's steady presence. They began to touch more small, tentative contacts at first. His hand on her elbow as they walked to town, her fingers brushing his as she passed him a cup of coffee. Eventually, these touches lingered, becoming more deliberate, more meaningful. One crisp October evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Forrest asked the question that had been unspoken between them for months. "Penelope," he began, his voice careful, "I've been wondering if you might tell me what happened to make you so afraid of men. Not out of curiosity," he added quickly, "but because I want to understand. To make sure I never do anything to remind you of whatever hurt you experienced." Penelope stared into the flames, the familiar fear rising in her chest at the thought of speaking about her past. But alongside it was a new feeling trust in this man who had proven himself worthy of it time and again. "My stepfather," she began softly, the words difficult after years of silence. "After my mother died, he changed. Or perhaps he was always that way and my mother's presence had kept him in check." Forrest remained silent, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "He drank," she went on, her hands twisting in her lap. "When he drank, he became violent. At first, it was just objects thrown against walls, furniture overturned. Then he began to hit me." Her voice faltered, and Forrest made a small sound, not quite a word, but an acknowledgement of her pain that encouraged her to continue. "It went on for nearly a year. I tried to leave, but he controlled everything, the money, my movements. He told everyone I was unstable after my mother's death, that I needed his guidance and protection." Her bitter laugh held no humor. "Protection? How did you escape?" Forrest asked quietly. An opportunity came. He was away on business. "I took what little money I could find and fled to another part of the city, found work as a seamstress. Changed my name slightly. I was born Penelope Williams, became Wilson." She took a deep breath, forcing herself to continue. "But that wasn't the end. My employer, Mr. Garrett, seemed kind at first, offered me better wages than the other girls, special treatment. I didn't understand why until—" She shuddered at the memory. "He tried to force himself on you," Forrest said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Penelope nodded. "I fought him off, but lost my position. After that, I was more careful, but jobs for women are scarce and I had no references. When the last shop closed, I saw an advertisement for mail-order brides. It seemed like my only option to escape Boston." "And you came here to a strange man despite everything you'd suffered," Forrest marveled. "That took immense courage, or desperation," she corrected. "Both, I think." He leaned forward in his chair, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Penelope, I want you to know something. I will never, ever raise a hand to you in anger. I will never force you to do anything against your will. And if I ever do anything that frightens you or brings back those memories, I need you to tell me so I can stop immediately." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "I know that now. I believe you, may I?" Forrest hesitated, then continued. "May I hold your hand?" The request, so simple yet so respectful of her boundaries, broke something open inside Penelope. Without a word, she extended her hand to him, and when his fingers closed gently around hers, she felt not fear but a profound sense of safety. They sat like that for a long time, hands joined, the fire crackling before them, neither needing to speak. In the weeks that followed, their relationship deepened, physical barriers falling away gradually as Penelope's trust grew. They began to hold hands regularly, to sit closer together in the evenings. Forrest would sometimes rest his arm around her shoulders as they read by the fire, and Penelope found herself leaning into his embrace, drawing comfort from his solid presence. November brought the first snow, transforming the landscape into a pristine white wonderland. Penelope stood at the window one morning, watching the flakes drift down when she felt Forrest's presence behind her. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, standing close but not touching her. "Yes," she agreed, turning to face him. "I never saw snow like this in Boston. It turned gray so quickly in the city." "It stays white here longer," Forrest said, his eyes on her face rather than the snow outside. "Especially up in the hills." Something in his gaze made Penelope's heart quicken. Over the past weeks, she'd become increasingly aware of the desire he carefully kept in check, visible only in fleeting glances or the way his breathing changed when they sat close together. "Forrest," she began, summoning her courage, "I've been thinking about our arrangement." His expression grew cautious. "Yes, I think I'm ready for a change." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I don't want separate bedrooms anymore." Forrest went very still, his eyes searching hers. "Penelope, are you certain there's no rush, no expectation?" "I'm content with things as they are if that's what makes you comfortable." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I'm ready. Because you've never pushed, never demanded, you've given me time to heal, to learn to trust again." Slowly, telegraphing his movements so she could stop him if she wished, Forrest raised his hand to cup her cheek. His touch was warm, gentle, reverent. "I love you, Penelope Blackwell," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I've loved you since I first saw you on that train platform, looking so brave and so frightened all at once." Tears sprang to Penelope's eyes at his words, at the tenderness in his touch. "I love you too," she whispered, the words new and yet utterly true. "I didn't know it was possible to feel this way, safe and excited at the same time." Forrest's smile was radiant as he bent his head toward hers, pausing just before their lips met to ask, "May I kiss you, wife?" "Yes," Penelope breathed, closing the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, a soft exploration, but it deepened as Penelope wound her arms around Forrest's neck, drawing him closer. His arms circled her waist, holding her securely but not confining her, always allowing her the freedom to pull away if she needed to. When they finally parted, both breathing quickly, Forrest rested his forehead against hers. "We'll take this as slowly as you need," he promised. "Just because you're ready to share a room doesn't mean we have to." Penelope silenced him with another kiss, more confident this time. "I want to be your wife, Forrest. In every way." That night, Penelope moved her things into Forrest's room, their room now. As darkness fell and they prepared for bed, she felt nervous but not afraid, her trust in this man complete after months of his unwavering patience and respect. Forrest was gentle, attentive, constantly checking that she was comfortable, that she wanted to continue. When they finally came together as husband and wife, Penelope discovered a joy she had never imagined possible, not just physical pleasure, but the profound emotional connection of being truly loved and cherished by someone she trusted completely. Afterward, lying in his arms as snow continued to fall outside their window, Penelope realized how far she had come from the frightened woman who had stepped off the train in Ukiah 10 months earlier. "What are you thinking?" Forrest asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I'm thinking about the day we met," she replied. "How terrified I was, how certain that you would turn out to be like all the other men I'd known." Forrest pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And now I know better." She raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "You've taught me that patience and kindness aren't weaknesses, that a man can be strong without being cruel." "You've taught me things too," he said, "about courage, about resilience." His hand caressed her cheek, "about love." "I never thought I could be happy again," Penelope admitted. "After everything that happened, I'd resigned myself to a life of just surviving. And now," Forrest prompted again. Penelope smiled, a full, uninhibited smile that transformed her face. "Now I'm not just surviving, I'm living, loving." She leaned down to kiss him softly. "Healing." The winter passed in a warm blur of happiness as Penelope and Forrest settled into their new, deeper relationship. They worked side by side during the day, managing the ranch through the snowy months, and spent their evenings and nights discovering the joys of true partnership in every sense. When spring arrived, bringing new life to the land, it brought unexpected news as well. Penelope confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. She was expecting their first child. "Are you sure?" Forrest asked, his face alight with wonder when she told him. "Mrs. Parker confirmed it," Penelope replied, her hands resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "The baby should arrive in late October." Forrest gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." "Are you pleased?" she asked, though his reaction had already answered the question. "Pleased doesn't begin to describe it." He drew back to look into her eyes. "Are you happy, Penelope, truly?" She thought of the journey that had brought her here, from fear to trust, from loneliness to love, from a mail-order bride agreement to a genuine marriage of equals. "I've never been happier," she said truthfully. "You've given me everything I never dared to hope for, Forrest. A home, love, safety." She placed her hand over his heart. A future. As summer bloomed across the land, Penelope's body changed with the growing life inside her. Forrest was endearingly protective, insisting she rest frequently and hiring a local girl to help with the heavier household tasks. "You're not made of glass," Penelope reminded him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, his hand resting on her rounded belly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," Forrest replied with a grin, "and not my wife." The tenderness in his eyes still had the power to take her breath away. This man, this good, patient, loving man, had healed wounds she thought would never close, had shown her what love was meant to be. In October, just as the leaves were turning to gold and crimson, their son was born after a difficult but ultimately successful labor. They named him Henry, after Forrest's father, with Michael as a middle name to honor Penelope's mother, Michaela. As Penelope held their son for the first time, Forrest beside her with tears in his eyes, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed in less than 2 years. "He's perfect," Forrest whispered, one finger gently stroking the baby's cheek, "just like his mother." "I'm far from perfect," Penelope demurred. "Perfect for me," Forrest amended, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Perfect for us." Looking from her husband's face to her son's, Penelope felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. The mail-order bride who had been scared of all men had found healing in the patient love of one good man, a cowboy who had proved that with time and tenderness, even the deepest wounds could heal. "I love you, Forrest Blackwell," she said, reaching for his hand. "And I love you, Penelope Blackwell," he replied, entwining their fingers. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days to come." As twilight settled over Blackwell Ranch, the little family held each other close, their future stretching before them bright with promise, rich with love, and healed by patience. 5 years later, Penelope stood on the porch of their home, watching as Forrest taught their son Henry to ride his first pony. Their 3-year-old daughter Clara sat on her hip, clapping with delight as her brother made a successful circuit of the corral. "Mama, did you see me?" Henry called, his face alight with pride. "I saw you, darling," Penelope called back, her heart full to bursting with love for her family. "You're doing wonderfully." Forrest glanced up at her, his smile as warm and loving as it had been from the start. In that moment, Penelope thought about the frightened woman who had stepped off the train in Ukiah 6 years earlier. Certain that no man could be trusted, that love was an illusion, that safety was something she would never know again. How wrong she had been. How fortunate that she had found the courage to take a chance on Forrest Blackwell, a man who understood that true strength lay in patience, in gentleness, in respect. As the sun set behind the mountains they both loved, casting golden light across their prosperous ranch, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that some wounds were meant to heal. Some hearts were meant to be restored, and some loves were worth every moment of waiting.